Welcome back to another episode of A Girl in a Blanket. If you guys remember, last week we discussed how parenting has been affected with the fact that I was adopted and the type of life I was raised in. Well, today I have a special guest with me. Her name is Hilary, and her story is phenomenal. We actually recorded this episode before, but due to technical problems, we are going to do it again, and hopefully today we get to hear it, and I am just so thrilled and excited to have her on board. Make sure though, you guys, that you like, share with your friends so then we can reach a wider audience and have more people join. Anyways, let's get going and hear from Hilary. All right, if you would like to go ahead and dive in with your
Okay.
story, tell us a little bit about your adoption story. I know you and I have talked about it, but I'm sure the listeners are very eager to hear from you.
All right. So I will say, just to begin, from the time I can remember, I knew I was adopted. My mom did make sure that I knew that. It was something that they wanted me to know. And the way they kind of phrased it, because my dad died when I was 4, was that they picked me. And that's kind of how they explained it. And for a while, that story kind of was how I coped, I guess, with some of the things in my childhood. Um, but as I got older, I definitely found myself more interested in my family. And I had my first son, and I was very interested in how, and scared, terrified actually, how I was going to be as a parent. Like, would I connect with him? And I watched your previous video and I really thought about it, and I didn't right away. Because there were some things in my childhood that happened that I didn't want repeated. So it took me probably a good year to realize, okay, he's mine. I'm gonna be his mother. I'm not gonna repeat mistakes that were made with me as a child, and bonded with him. So, anyways, um, shortly after I had him, my mom, and that's my adoptive mom, came to me and said, "Hey, I'm from Canada, Ontario, the province that I grew up in, opened the adoption records. If you want to find your birth family, you can go ahead, fill out the paperwork." So she gave me all the information. I filled it out. I really like how my province handled it. So they wouldn't let the adoptive parent or birth parents reach out to you first. You, as the adoptive child, had the option. So if they were looking for you, you could select, I want a phone call, I want an email, I want a personal visit. And so I selected a letter because I knew that if it ever happened, I was going to be like, I didn't want someone just showing up at my house or calling me because it would probably freak me out. So probably 10 years went by. And I would get a letter right around my birthday every year saying, no one's looking for you. And it was just every time it was just like knife to the heart. I guess I stupidly always thought that somehow one day magically my birth mom would just show up on my birthday. I think a lot of adoptive kids probably think that. And then, gosh, about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I was at the mailbox with my son, who's now just graduated from college, so it's been a while. And I had just gotten one of those same letters. No one's looking for you. Sorry. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Well, there's another one. And it was just like a week or two later, and I almost threw it out because I was just like rude. Like, you just really want to rub the salt in my wounds now. But oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can. Okay, perfect. I don't know what happened, but if you can hear me, that's good. Um, Anyway, so I opened it and I realized it was fatter, fatter letter than before. And I started flipping the pages and I saw my birth certificate with my birth name, which was Olivia Grace. And I was like, oh, this is different. This is different. And so my son Will is in the back seat and I'm like, Will, Mommy has to deal with something. Go in the house because I knew I was going to be a complete basket case. So I'm reading it, and when I get to the third page, there is a little chicken scrawl letter from my birth mom saying, I'm your mother, and I've been looking for you for all of these years. Please call me, and it's phone number. And so I called my husband immediately, and I was just a basket case. So nervous, so anxious, had so many questions. So I screwed up my courage. It took me a lot of time, but I did, and called the number, and it was my birth mom. And she and I talked for, oh my goodness, an hour. And she sent me a lot of pictures, and I think one thing a lot of adopted kids struggle with is, who do I look like? Because my adoptive family, they're very small, little short people, and I wasn't. And I didn't look anything like anyone. And all of a sudden, we're opening these emails, looking at pictures of my birth mom. And she's like a doppelganger. I'm like, oh, that is my twin. That's who I look like. That's why I look the way that I do. So it answered a lot of questions. And from her, I was able to finally get information about my birth dad. And interestingly enough, when we had our first son, my first son is very tall, has bright blue eyes, blonde hair. My husband's dark haired and dark eyed, and I have hazel eyes. And he kept saying, "Oh, he's got to look like your birth dad," because I did have like a page and a half of some biological history where I could go through it. And man, that was like my Bible for a lot of my childhood, just reading it over and over and over and reading every little piece of it. And so he would say, "Oh, well, when we find your birth dad," and I kept telling him, "No, we're not going to find my birth dad. He's gone. Like, I know he's dead. I can feel it." And that was why, and at least part of the hesitation of why my birth mom didn't want to say who my birth dad was, because he had passed in a car accident. So both of my dads, my adoptive and biological, died before I was 4. So that was sad. But through her, I was able to track down my birth dad's family. Funny story, there's 13 siblings, and my dad's name was Dale. And so I was like, okay, if maybe they all have D names. So I just started going to the little town in New Brunswick he was from and started picking D names. And the name I picked was Danny. And lo and behold, Danny was my uncle. But he didn't know about me because my dad was the second oldest sibling, and so he had to confirm it with all the rest of the family, which was excruciating. It was like a 3-day wait to hear back, like, yes, you are part of this family, the Browns. That's their last name. And when we finally heard back, it was amazing. It was probably one of the happiest days of my life. I had all of these aunts and uncles because I always felt like I belonged in a big family. But I have this little teeny adopted family, and I just felt like I should be in the midst of a lot of chaos. Like my mom used to call me Hurricane Hilary. It's just kind of this whirling dervish of energy. And that's what I have. I have like all these aunts and uncles, all these cousins. And so the next year, we went to Canada. So both my boys, my husband, me, we went to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So my birth mom's in Nova Scotia, my sisters, and my birth dad's family is in New Brunswick. And we went to the Browns, my dad's family first, and it was crazy that they rented out like a fire hall. There were so many people there, not just like cousins, aunts, uncles, my dad's mom. She was there. It was friends of my father. He was a very popular, gregarious guy, which kind of explains a little bit of my personality as well. We got to go to his grave. Learn the story of me. And then we went to my birth mom and we were able to meet her. And I have 2 half sisters, and then I have a half brother on my birth dad's side. It was just an incredible event, and we're still close. That's the beauty of it. We talk frequently, calls, cards. I mean, we really feel like we have this whole other family, and which is good because my adoptive brother and I left, we have no other family. And so it's so good for my boys to have this big, giant, supportive family. And they do every birthday, every holiday. Like, you can I don't know, there's 30 or 40 Browns, or, they're may have their married name and they're wishing them happy birthday, which is something they never had. And so, of course, we're able to see who they look like, who their traits come from. So it answered a lot of questions for me. It definitely helped me be less angry. I didn't realize how angry I was. But I was, particularly with the father bond, and probably that's partially because my adoptive dad also died. So like it any movie that had like a good father-daughter bond, I would leave. I couldn't watch because it would just make me bawl because I knew that both my dads were gone. And then with my birth mom, it's been a little harder for me just because I had a little bit of resentment and I am working through it. I'm definitely working through it, but it was clear that my birth dad was the one who really did want to keep me. And his whole family, the ones that knew, excuse me, knew wanted to. My birth mom didn't. And that's okay. I guess she actually did around month 8, and her father brought in a family who was going to adopt me. But they didn't adopt me. And so what ended up happening is I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and my family that did adopt me, my mom and dad, we'll just call them that, they were like 13th on the list. And for some reason, and there's never some reason, there's always a good reason, every person couldn't take me, whether it was I was a girl and they wanted a boy, or they just weren't at that point in their life. And so they were just so overjoyed, they didn't even know if I was a boy or a girl when they said yes to adopting me. So, uh, but I will say that, especially in the last year of my life, um, after losing my mom, and my brother has a traumatic brain injury, so it's really just me as the matriarch, I guess you can say. Um, I really had to get a lot of therapy. I mean, I had therapy before, but I had to get a lot of therapy. And I was diagnosed with RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder. And one thing that I have found with every person I know who is adopted, we all have this kind of hole, especially if you don't know anything about your, biological parents, you don't have a picture of them. I think that therapy is really a good idea for anyone who's adopted. I mean, we as adoptees have a much higher rate of, addiction, suicide, risk-taking behaviors. And yes, did I see all of those things in myself when I was younger? Yeah, absolutely. By the grace of God, I found a wonderful man and got married and got pregnant with my son very early. And I think that's really honestly part of why I'm still here. Is because I had some pretty crazy behavior. I'm not gonna lie. I was wild. And so it forced me to grow up, but also forced me to face, all of the emotions that I had tried not to deal with, really. Like I knew they were there, but I just tried not to deal with them. But the anger that I had felt was, I don't think of myself as an angry person. That's what was so strange. But everyone who knew me before my birth mom and my birth dad, and reuniting with the birth dad's family and birth mom, um, they all were like, "You're so different. You're different. Like something's different. You're content, serene." And really, I am, because I know the answer now, why I was put up for adoption. The story of my dad, the story of my mom, the story of this family, especially on my birth dad's side, who really wanted me. And then I actually have developed a really close relationship with my half sisters on my mom's side, which has been beautiful to actually have sisters. So it's just, for me, it's been a wonderful experience. I realize I am not like the normal story. I have heard some not so great stories, and I'm very grateful that I actually had a happy ending in this, because there's been a lot of tragedy in my life. So I'm very grateful. So there's my story.
I love it. Thank you, Hilary. I really
Eh,
appreciate it. I
Thank
think
you.
it's
Yeah.
it's nice to hear that. I'm not a psychotic basket case when I'm hearing, like, talking to you that we've been like messaging back and forth. And I'm like, it's nice to be able to relate to somebody who knows like what
Yeah.
I'm going through and like how I'm trying to navigate life as an adoptee. I did have a
Yeah.
question for you though. Did you ever feel like you were the black sheep of the family before you
Oh,
found your biological mom and your biological
abso-freaking-lutely.
husbands?
Yes, yes, heck yes. In fact, that very thing, feeling like a black sheep or feeling like I was separated, different, isolated, that was actually one of the defining parts of my diagnosis of RAD, is that feeling that you don't belong, that I didn't belong anywhere. And I still struggle a little bit with that because I feel sometimes trapped in between worlds, right? So like I'm an almost daughter to my mother, an almost daughter to my biological father, an almost daughter to my adopted mother and father, but not quite fitting in any one world, if that makes sense. So yes, absolutely yes. But I've learned, I have my own family. I have my boys. I have my husband, and that's where I fit in. But I think that's a very common feeling.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like for me personally, there's times where I go in these waves of like, I belong, I don't belong, I belong. And, my poor husband has to
Yeah.
deal with my constant emotional roller coaster.
Oh,
But he's a champ. He's
no.
handling it really well.
No. I think based on the videos I've seen, I think he's handling it very well, and so are you.
Thank you.
I mean, it is not, I don't think anyone can understand it unless they're actually adopted. You just can't.
Yeah.
You can't comprehend that. Like, imagine going through your whole life, or, for me, the first 30 years of my life, not knowing who I looked like, not seeing one, like I would sit on buses in Canada because we have a really good public transit system, and I would look everywhere because I knew my birth mom had lived in Ottawa, try to find someone who looked like me. Like those things, someone who isn't adopted takes for granted. There is no story of great Granny Betty and her chin that you have. We don't have those stories. And in my family, my adopted family, my responses to things, my temperament, were so different. So different. And so a large part of my childhood, and my adulthood, I wondered what's wrong with me? Why don't I respond the way that they respond? And so you start questioning yourself. And when I met my biological family, I was able to see, oh, well, that's where I get it from. And no, there was nothing wrong with me. It's just there's that constant nature versus nurture.
Mhm.
And nurture doesn't override nature or vice versa. That's what's so fascinating about it. So, yeah,
It's definitely different. Yeah, I feel like if you're a listener and you're adopted and you wonder why you sometimes feel like super psychotic or you're unbalanced, it's mostly because you're having a disconnection from your family and you're feeling uncomfortable in those situations. For me, for example, when my family brings up certain memories that they had before they adopt me or adopted me, those memories sometimes make me feel like I missed out on a whole entire chapter of their lives. And so sometimes I just kind of go, oh, yeah, you guys did have a whole chapter because they always made sure
before.
that in their current chapter I was always included. But sometimes when they bring up the previous chapter, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely like missed out on some stuff, but that's okay,
Oh,
like all of us have different memories that we all
yes,
create, and unfortunately you can't recreate some of the memories that you already had. And
true.
so yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely understand it. Again, I've known so many people who are adopted, and I'm a voracious learner, right? Like I love to learn. And so I have done so much research on it because I wanted to understand what was like in my mind wrong with me. What was wrong with me? And it wasn't necessarily that there was anything wrong with me. It's there's common the adoptees that I see, my husband has some cousins who are adopted. I see the same traits. I have some friends who are adopted, same traits. We all have these very similar experiences, even though our adoption stories, like your story and my story, are totally different. But it still resulted in a lot of the same, behaviors, thought patterns, struggles. So I think it's something that a lot of people overlook and don't realize that there is a real lifelong struggle that that adoptee is going to go through. Even if there is a happy reuniting like there was for me, there's still struggles as a result.
Yeah,
So,
totally. I
yeah.
Well, Hilary, thank you so much for your
You're
time tonight. I
welcome.
appreciate
You are
you
so
sharing your
welcome.
story. And of course, we also have to do a part two because I would love to dive in more in deep in some other questions that I have for you. But we will end this episode here, you guys. And make sure that if you are listening, make sure to subscribe and like and share. That way we can reach more adoptees. That way we can share everybody's stories and have more relatability. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Hilary. You have a
You're
wonderful
welcome.
day.